Yeah, please be open-minded to the idea that everything I say isn't truth, isn't fact, and I'm not recommending anything to you. Like, I'm talking about my own experience. I'm talking about what I've learned from years of working with people and doing this, and reading, and yeah, being involved in non-duality for like 20 years now. But it's not the way it is. Like sometimes because of where the idea of gurus come from and the idea of spiritualities come from, we then take that to other teachers and we look at the other teacher like a pedestal, like they know and I don't know, so what they're saying is truth. And there is nothing that can ever be truth. And from one thing that I know from working with people for many years is that one shoe doesn't fit all. It's different for everybody. Yeah. So don't use this as a way to fix your life or to fix your career or to fix mental health issues or you've altered these types of things. Like non-duality is the freedom, but there is things in the flow in life, and there are people that are experts on this that you can talk with. My expertise is non-duality, and then also I work with the body and I work with the energetic experiences of emotions in the body and chakras. And I'm good at the insight into the connection between what we think, our actions, and what we feel in the body, and going deep into that. And then non-duality. But it's not like one thing fix all. We often like that, like the idea, right? I go and listen to this teacher and they can fix everything. So that's my little disclaimer. It's like, listen to what I say and use it as a springboard to grow and to evolve. But as soon as it becomes something that's pinning you down or closing you down, then you're misunderstanding it, or it's being used in the wrong way, or you're taking it to be some form of truth. I remember when I used to go and listen to Tony Parsons speak, I always used to love him saying, if you leave here with any extra ideas or any extra belief systems, then you completely missed the point. And that's not quite the same as what I'm saying, but I used to like it when he said that. What I'm saying is that, yes, that's true in regards to non-duality, and with all the other stuff, like use it as a way to help the human grow, not as an excuse to avoid and to keep yourself small. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So now we shall start with a really great title, an exciting title. Does consciousness remain after death? That's so explosive, that title. It's so explosive. That can be answered in so many different ways. So well, I don't even know where to start. Like, in the end, we don't know. So yeah, we don't know anything really. We're just here. It's just a happening. This is happening. And we don't really know what happens at death. I have my theories about what happens at death, but they're my theories, and then they're coming through my collection of words put together that create some sort of meaning, but they're not a truth. So to me, what happens in physical death, this is what I feel happens, because I feel like I've died many times in life. So I feel like I know what happens, but I haven't obviously physically died yet. But it could be that I have died billions of times before. Like, in a way, that's true as well because of past lives. But for me, what I feel happens is that in the moment of death, what all objects begin to be taken away or begin to disappear. So the world begins to disappear, the smells begin to disappear, the taste begins to disappear, your memories begin to disappear, your ideas, your imaginations, your titles, your worries, your stresses, feelings, the emotional body, physical sensation, the room, others. Everything gets further and further away. And as that gets further and further away, there'll be a moment of intense fear where there is something that wants to scramble back and hold on to those things. And then that intense fear is seen to just be a fear. I suppose, I don't know, what happens here is that fear is just seen to be like a physiological reaction that happens, like the body is designed to stay alive, so there is this moment of fear that appears, and it's either believed or not believed. So there is either a belief that there's something really scary or not scary happening, so that comes and it's really seen as not scary, and then that passes and everything gets further and further away, and what's left is this love, this bliss of who you are, and this empty watching. So it's this love and empty watching. And that's also what happens when you die in this life as well. Like, so when you die, when the body is still physically alive. Now then, after that point, when that's happened, it could be that then life goes into the non-expression of everything. So then it would go into a state of rest or nothingness, absolute nothingness, or it manifests again, or it just stays in that state of watching. And none of it's an issue, because if everything disappears, so if it goes into a state of nothingness, which can't really happen because it doesn't exist, there's nobody there that worries about it. If it stays in the love and bliss, there's no one there that worries about it. That is perfect. And then if it manifests again as your true essence, none of it matters, whether it does or doesn't. So that's, to me, what happens in spiritual death. And so that's what I assume, and what feels really true, will happen in physical death. And some people feel like you go into other realms if you don't go past that fear, but I don't know any of that. Could be. It's interesting. These different realms of hell or something, or attachment. So it's like if you don't let go, then you go into a realm. You could actually see that as what's happening in life. So you have these like mini awakening experiences where you don't drop into that love, and then you come back to being alive or being someone. And then maybe what manifests then is that attachment, like any more attachments that happen. And then that might be what the Buddhists mean about these different realms. So to me, the losing of self is all about detachment to the person. So it's not about the human feeling pleasure and pain as such, but it's the attachment to that pleasure and pain, and that attachment to subject-object. So who you are is this vast emptiness that's watching, that is pure love, this bigness. And then it sort of gets zoomed in and focused in and attached to the person. So then this consciousness is not a thought and it's not a memory. So it's not like consciousness can remember itself, because it is just itself. So it's not like, oh, I've got involved in the person, I am consciousness. That's something that happens in the human world. Consciousness is just looking. It's just that in the world of looking, so in the world of appearances, there is something that's arisen in the human that kind of owns that consciousness and says, I am conscious. Like that belongs to me. And then that consciousness seemingly becomes like entrapped in that human world. But really, if you really examine your experience, even when there's identification, like energetic identification with the person, your essence as consciousness is still totally expanded in all things. It's just that the person now maybe has too many beliefs or too many attachments, and so it's too dense for that to be seen. So it's like, if you imagine like what I was saying about what happens in death, that you have like all things begin to get further and further away. Like that's what happens in awakening, is that it's not the person that becomes detached, it's just that the consciousness becomes separated from that person. So when it's identified, they're like both tightly bound together. But in that moment of awakening, it's like all those attachments become further away, or like less big. So they take up less room, and then it's just known that what you actually are is this looking, which is all things. You are everything, your life, which is love. It's so beautiful, this subject. I love this subject. How could everybody not be like totally in love with it? And the mechanism that happens in the human, once it feels out of contact with who it truly is seeking, because it's terrifying being a singular object in relationship to this world. Even though it's not really obviously terrifying, it's like on a deep level, there is an element of terror to it, because you are then vulnerable to this world. You're vulnerable to being eaten by this world. So it's like it creates this intensity in the human. So then the pleasures through time become extra important, because you project onto the pleasures that they're going to bring you back to that deep rest. Like you'll get a big enough house, you'll get enough money, and then you can relax. You'll have your kids, then you can relax. You'll finish your next work, then you can relax. You'll do your tax returns, then you can relax. You'll buy a new table, then you can relax. And it never happens. You never really get to that moment of relaxedness. Maybe there's moments where you feel like, I've done it. But it really doesn't really ever get to that point where you just feel contented in being here. And that's because there is the identification, there is this seed of feeling like there's something wrong here, there is something not quite right, which is true, because your essence is free, your essence is empty. Like there is this deep connection to life and this deep knowing that there's nothing really bad that can happen to you. But it doesn't mean that the body doesn't stop feeling things. This is where the person is already getting confused. Like the body is meant to have fear, but it's the attachment to the fear that makes it really awful and makes it linger. That the body is meant to have jealousy, but the body is meant to have anger. The body is meant to have frustration. It's meant to have joy. It's meant to have pleasure. It's meant to have sexuality. All these things. It's meant to be conditioned. And it's not the conditioning that's the problem, even though we often like smooth out the conditioning to make it thinner. That's not the actual problem. The problem is that there is some identification, the glue, where it's like you feel like you're conscious, rather than it being the other way around. Who you are is consciousness, and in that's appearing a person. So beautiful. And this is a really different way of being than being like the consciousness that person believes it's conscious. It's really different. But it's so many years now I'm beginning to forget, but it is really different. Like having this deep sense of rest and this energetic expansion. And it changes like your brain. Like it makes your brain more empty or something. Everything's passing through quicker. You're not holding on to things. Like your memory is less like running the story of you. There needs to be a story of the character running at points in order to function. There needs to be functioning. But it's yeah, there's something like it kind of gives me the feeling often like I'm a bit stoned. Nice way. But it's like my brain can't really hold on to things properly. And throughout the day there can be like more closeness to the human and less closeness to the human. I know that sounds weird, but you can become totally unidentified, but in that place you can't function. So to me, I might be wrong about that, but to me, you can't function with absolute disidentification. You become like a baby or like an idiot. Oh, sorry, that's a bit rude to say, like an idiot. I mean, like you become unable to function. Like you need to have some identification with the body in order to function. That consciousness needs to be in some way connected to the particular object it's looking through in order to function. And to me, that feels like it is like it comes closer to the person and then less close. I don't feel like there's seeking here in this body anymore, but I do notice there's old patterns of seeking, so old ways of responding to things. Like, yeah, I'm not sure if I can think of something now, but it's like your body has been so used to doing certain things for so many years that it has a like, you know how wolves run when they have an enclosure, they make a path in which they pace around every day. It's like that's the same for the person. So you've got these patterns and these ways of behavior, and it changes your conditioning, but it's not like it making the human perfect. Like I still have childhood traumas in this body. Like I can still get activated into not speaking up and then speaking up too much or something like that, like these old ways of being. But they become a lot more distant and a lot more impersonal. They still are there, and it's really important. Like in the beginning, I couldn't really perceive that they were still there. I could and couldn't. Like sometimes throughout the day, if like, it's also the same, like if you're so much into consciousness, you can't really perceive the details of the body, but they are still there, and your body is still functioning through that conditioning of, like it has to perform through conditioning. So that was my dyslexia there, which is most probably also affected by the awakening, because the awakening certainly did something to my memory and to my language as well, like the attachment. And I think that there's also been like experiments on people with the brain, and they believe it's like identification, or not identification, the creation of the self is connected to the memory. And so if you're not so identified with the person, then you're not using that area of the memory so much, which then adds to my dyslexia. Like I honestly think my dyslexia is a superpower. Like somebody recently suggested a technique where I could use to try and get rid of my dyslexia. And I'm not sure I would choose to. Like even though it creates difficulties for me in my functioning everyday life, I also seriously think that it made me very open-minded and susceptible to awakening, because my brain just can't really hold on to words and language and meaning very well. But it also makes me rubbish at certain things as well. So I don't know if I would choose the button to, I mean, it'd be lovely to just be able to spell and read properly, and do grammar and all these things, but I also think in images, like, so even in there, when I was talking about grammar, I was imagining grammar on the paper, on a piece of paper, and somebody's hand and a pencil. And then when I was talking about dyslexia, I was imagining myself and my old dyslexic teacher. It's funny, isn't it, the way we think? Yeah. And so what happens in physical death, I assume, is as your brain is shutting down, that functioning, which is creating the attachment to the separate self, there's nothing wrong with the separate self, it's the attachment to it. We need a separate self. We need an ego, believe it or not. Otherwise we'll just be like, Lisa, would you like a cup of tea? Would you like to go to the toilet? Would you like to raise your left hand? Yes, there's nothing. What was I saying? I can't even remember. Also, my memory is just shocking. Sometimes, like the other morning, I did a session, and I wasn't, at the end of the session, I wasn't sure that I was actually coherent. I wasn't sure that I was fully, I think at times, I was really forgetting what I was talking about and just kind of like, and then changing subject. I don't think that they would have really noticed. It could be, like afterwards I was a bit like, I was really incoherent today. Yeah. So we just move on. So in death, that's what I was talking about. In death, as the brain begins to stop functioning, there is something that happens which disidentifies with the consciousness, and then the consciousness is coming to the forefront, and the objects are going and disappearing into that consciousness. That's what I assume happens.